Welcome to the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Owens. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about faxing and interoperability. So, if you have wondered recently, if you're trying to move medical records between one healthcare provider and another, why things have to be faxed rather than emailed or sent via another, maybe possibly more modern communication mechanism. Ideally, we are moving between health systems that are using something like Epic's Care Anywhere, which does allow for the electronic transmission of medical records from one Epic using institution to another. But sometimes you're moving from, like a private practice that doesn't use Epic to another one, and you may have to actually have medical records printed and faxed to your doctor. If you're curious why this is, and I have been curious because up until the point when I started working in clinical research, I didn't realize that the standard for medical communication was faxing. Kind of naively, I thought, oh, we'll use something like like Dropbox, or we'll use something like email. Um, and I got a really quick sort of introduction into why when I was trained as a research coordinator. So under the High Tech Act, I believe it was, the Obama administration offered incentives to adopt electronic health records, which is great. We went from 9% of healthcare providers being on an electronic health record in 2008 to 83% of healthcare providers being on an electronic health record in 2015. This is awesome. This is huge. Like, this sort of adoption of technology in the healthcare field almost never happens. This is a absolutely revolutionary change. Um, so, in order to preserve privacy, though, we had to be careful about how we're transmitting these records. And in naive young research coordinator Jenny's mind, I have an email address. I'm the only one who has that email address. It's my name. You can send me information at that email address and I will receive it. Um, Email, not necessarily an individual communication, right? We can't guarantee that if we send an email to Owen's household at hotmail.com, that it's just going to be me who's going to see my privileged medical information. Or if I'm sending my medical records perhaps to Dr. Owens's private healthcare, we don't know that it's going to meet the minimum necessary standard. If that inbox is shared by multiple parties, if it's monitored by people who don't need to see my medical records, the email is not necessarily the most private standard for communication. So as we're thinking about the ways to communicate this information, we're thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to put my medical records in a box on this end, and it's going to go through a tube, and it's going to come out a box on this end. And that sounds like a lot like a fax machine. So I actually learned how to operate a fax machine at the age of 20 mumble, when I got my first job as a research coordinator. So the interesting thing about the incentives offered by the Obama administration in order to adopt the electronic health record is that they did not really specify interoperability. They kind of left it up to the good-heartedness of the health systems, which is interesting, right? Because there's kind of a disincentive to let go of your patients. Once you have them within the warm and loving grasp of your health system, the best health system in the entire world, there is a disincentive to let them go. And then you don't necessarily want to make it any easier for them to leave. So there is a bit of I don't want to call it a disincentive, but there is a bit of a barrier to freely sharing that medical information. Hospitals see this as proprietary. They see some of this information as trade secrets. And it's really interesting because when I was researching for this podcast, I ran across this article from Vox that really kind of went into the financial and logistic disincentives to share these records. And their basic argument was like, well, why would I make it easy for a patient to see another doctor? It makes a lot of sense if you think about the healthcare data market, right? We have, and when I say we, I mean health systems here. We have spent a lot of time building this data and building this very valuable source of data. We wouldn't necessarily want to let it just walk out the door. But if we start to think about this philosophically, and we go back to the point that we've been talking about for a couple of episodes about who owns the data, is it the healthcare system that has entered all of that data, generated it, maintained the databases, and thus has an interest in that data? Or is it me, the patient? Do I own that data? And if it's mine, I should be able to cart it around. I should be able to take it from one doctor to the next. And then we kind of get back to the situation where I requested my own medical records, right? I requested my own medical records a few years ago, and what I got back was incomplete and very charmingly, like 15 degrees off of off of vertical. It was clear that somebody had printed it out and scanned it in and sent it to me, and it was extremely charming. And so I was just imagining if I'm switching providers and I'm taking this 15 degrees off of vertical pack of papers and I'm taking it over to them and I'm sitting in a new doctor's office trying to explain to them that one of my children is on here, but the other child is not for, reasons. I'm having a difficult time thinking about how my new doctor is going to take that information and put it into their own electronic health record. If there are not, again, one of the organizations that has access to an interoperability standard, such as Epic's Care Anywhere. All of this to say that healthcare is at a really fascinating crossroads right now when it comes to technology, because we have incentives to adopt really fantastic technology such as the electronic health record. We have incentives to adopt artificial intelligence, new algorithms, all sorts of things that can really truly change health for people. And we are doing all of this in a regulatory framework that is extremely strict. We are doing all of this with ethical and legal standards that are extremely high. And so when you start thinking about innovation in healthcare, it is helpful to remember that healthcare is this fascinating mix of extremely ahead and also very anchored in certain specific ways of doing things. So it is a really fascinating culture of both extremely innovative and extremely conservative.